Welcome to Unspoken Conversations with Candace, where we talk openly about taboo topics in order to spark difficult and uncomfortable conversations, where we allow a safe place for anyone who has had trauma to be heard. Unspoken Conversations with Candace is about speaking your truth by using your voice because you matter. Each season on my podcast has its purpose, and for season 3, it is dedicated to all male survivors. I want to express my sincerest gratitude and acknowledge Jeff Chugum. He was curious to learn more about my podcast. Once I explained my vision for season 3, he wanted to help. Thank you, Jeff, for your sponsorship and support. Special thanks to Jesse Daso for assisting in the planning, logistics, and helping to invite guests for season 3. And last but not least, Neil Parekh, my season 3 co host. Neil arranged to have Digimentors produce the show on a pro bono basis. Digimentors is helping me step out of my comfort zone by implementing video production. This form of media stream will be available broadly via our social media and our websites. I am extremely grateful to work with Neil and Digimentors. If you are interested in a high quality virtual or hybrid event, I encourage you to reach out to Digimentors. They work with nonprofits, higher education, corporate partners, international organizations, and others. It does not matter where you are based or how big or small your business is. They also do social and digital consulting, training, workshops, videography, recruitment, and more. Check out the links in the show notes for their contact information. Trigger warning. Before we begin, I want to make you aware that we are going to be talking about some very sensitive issues. All of our guests are male survivors of sexual assault. They will be sharing very personal stories about rape, incest, sexual abuse, and or assault. Please take a moment and make sure you are in an appropriate place to watch and or listen. Some of the descriptions may be explicit and have the potential of bringing up a range of emotions. It is more than okay for you to hit pause and come back to this later if you find that you need to. So, welcome, Neil, to the show today. Thank you for being here. I appreciate you being my co host.
Thank you, Candace. It's an absolute pleasure. I'm so glad to be on this journey with you and to be, the fact that you've dedicated season 3 to male survivors. It means so much.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we've talked about this now for over a year and we are in full production mode here. So, this is amazing. I'm so excited to introduce our guest here today. So let me introduce Callen Harty. Callen Harty grew up in southwestern Wisconsin and lived the dark secret. From the age of 10 to almost 18 years old, he was sexually abused on a regular basis. In 2010, he explored that abuse in the autobiographical play called Invisible Boy, which premiered at Broome Street in Madison, Wisconsin. After seeing many people moved and many lives change as a result of the play, he became a strong advocate for child sex abuse survivors, writing articles and essays, encouraging changes in law, organizing a conference on male survivors, and becoming a public speaker on the issue. He knew that through a book about his experiences could potentially reach many more people and help countless others come to terms with their own abuse. So, welcome, Callen, to the show. Appreciate you being here today.
Thank
And
you.
it's
Thank you so much for having me. I'm honored to be here. I appreciate both of you doing this for all survivors.
Yes, yes. So, Callen, I just when we talked initially, I always meet one on one with my guests and want to get to know you a little bit more on a personal level. The story that you shared about your abuse, it hit me close to home because they were very, similar in the experiences and the feelings and the shame and the guilt. And I think the biggest thing takeaway was how long there was a traumatic experience that happened in your life that was that trigger for you that you needed to come out with your truth. But then how long it took you to really kind of open up and share. I was 47 when I started writing my story, and then you talked about how old you were, and talking about statistics, the average age of a grown adult, a person coming out is 52 to come out with their story of abuse, if they want to vocalize it. So that really hit home for me. And I remember you saying, Candace, my life is literally an open book. And I felt the same way. The minute my book was released, that's just what I felt like, no holds barred, so to speak. So again, I really appreciated how honest and raw and real. And I went out to Amazon and I bought 2 of your books to show my support so that I could really hear your story and understand, your story. So I am so excited for you to give you this platform to share your story. And that's really what I want you to do, is to make sure you're sharing it with the audience, and whoever's, going to listen and tune in to hear your story. So please, please share. I'm going to turn it over to Callen Harty here. Thank you for being here today.
All right. Thank you so much. So I'll start early. I'll give you a little bit of background first, I guess. I grew up in a very small town in southwest Wisconsin, a little town called Schulzberg. Had 1,376 people when I was growing up. There's less than that now. I grew up in a very strict Roman Catholic family. My father had died when I was 2 years old, so my mother raised an 8-year-old, 6-year-old, 3-year-old, and 2-year-old on her own from the age of 35. I was the baby of the family too, so I have no memories of my dad at all. When I was about 9 or 10, my oldest brother touched me where he shouldn't be touching me, through my pants. It wasn't anything more than that, but I didn't understand it, and I was confused by it, and it felt wrong. So I told my mother about it, and this is probably one of the most significant parts of the beginning part of my journey. Her response to that was, "Oh, you shouldn't let him do that to you," which put the onus on me. Mm-hmm. So I took the blame, I took the shame because of her words. And I know my mother did not mean to do that. This was an era back in the 1960s where people didn't talk about sexual abuse. And, a single mother like her, coming from a strict Catholic background, she probably had no idea how to deal with what I told her at all. But because of that, about a year later, when I was first more seriously sexually abused, I didn't tell her. I didn't tell anyone else. This part of it, I'll give a little trigger warning because this part is a little bit hard to hear. But the next time, my brother asked me if I wanted to play a game, and I was 10 years old. So my oldest brothers asked me to play a game. Of course I want to play a game. So I said yes. And then he said, well, I have to tie you up to play this game. And, we played cops and robbers and cowboys and Indians in the neighborhood, so they didn't seem anything out of the ordinary. So he tied my hands to a piece of furniture and my legs to another. And then all of a sudden, my pants were being unbuckled and pulled down. And I didn't know what was happening, but I struggled mightily for a 10-year-old with a much larger and more mature person sitting on my chest. But obviously I did not have the strength to fight it. Another really significant image from that moment was over his back on the wall was a crucifix of Jesus looking down on what was happening and not doing anything. And I have often said I lost both my spirituality and my innocence on that day. And still, I'm now a very spiritual person, but not the religion that I was raised in. After that event, pretty much if my mother would go to the grocery store and leave us alone, I could expect that something else might happen. If she, took her sister and went over to Dubuque shopping, I could expect that something would happen. I don't know how many times, and I don't remember every time, I'm sure. There are some moments that really stand out, very vivid memories, and then others are just hazy, pretty much lost moments. I do remember one time, oftentimes this would happen in the basement, in a back room where the washing machine was. It was pitch black. And in that room, I was raped and screamed very loudly, but nobody was home. And the neighbors, aren't right next to you in a town like that. The houses are separated a little bit. So obviously nobody heard that. And he didn't stop until he was ready to stop. He took me out into a farmland one time and managed to coerce me into doing something out in public. And there was a plane flying overhead that scared the hell out of me, that somebody was, spying on us and seeing what was happening. And I couldn't tell anybody because of that thing that my mother had first said. I didn't know what to do about that. So I never told anybody. When I was 17 or 18, I finally did tell a friend of mine, but immediately after spilling that, I told you can't tell anybody else. So I got scared because I had let that slip out, and it was supposed to be a secret. He had threatened me. I don't recall the specifics of the threat, but I know that he told me that I better not ever tell anyone. And those kinds of things stay with you years and years later. When I was in my 50s, when I was writing my play Invisible Boy, I had fears as I was writing that if he found out that I was writing it, that he would kill me. But I knew I had to finish it. As you mentioned my health issues before, what happened was in 2008, I had a massive heart attack on stage in the middle of an opening night performance of a play. So if you're going to do it, you might as well do it big. But it was 100% blockage in my left coronary. And those kinds of events make you stop and think about your life and think about what you're doing with your life and what's important, what still needs to be done. So it took me another couple of years, but I knew that I had to share that story. And I had written I've written a couple dozen plays at that point. It was a little less than that, but I knew that was the format that I needed to explore it in. So I wrote the play Invisible Boy, and it was produced at Broome Street. And I could see how sharing that story impacted people in the audiences. We had talkbacks on Sundays, and there were people who opened up about their own experiences with sexual abuse who had never told anyone before. I had people come up to me after the play privately and thank me for sharing the story and letting me know their own story. I would get emails from total strangers. And so I realized that, particularly as a male survivor, that I needed to share my story because men don't talk about feelings. I think we're getting better at it as a society, but I knew there weren't a lot of male survivors who were open and willing to be open about that kind of story. So I wrote the play, and because of the experiences with the play, that's when I became an activist. And that's when a couple of years later, I decided I needed to write a memoir about it, a little more detail, a little more explanation, a little more story of not only the abuse, but what was important to me was the recovery. I don't think you're ever fully recovered, but I think you can recover a lot. And I think talking about it helps with that. Every time I've ever had a speaking engagement, I think it's helped other people, but I know it's also helped me as well.
Thank you, Callen, for sharing that everything that you stated. I mean, there were things that I was mentally putting notes, put a pin in my head to make sure I follow up because there were things that I felt. So the first thing was, the name of the memoir, can you just reference the name of your memoir? Is that The Empty Playground, the survivor story?
Correct. Empty
Okay.
Playground, a survivor story. The title comes from a poem that I wrote in high school about an empty playground being a very lonely kind of thing. And that, of course, is symbolic of a lost childhood.
Mm-hmm. And so then thank you for, I wanted to make sure we put a plug in for your memoir to make sure, for other survivors, to purchase, support you as an author. And, the stories are so similar when I think about what you experience and
I
just some of the
appreciate that.
feelings.
It's interesting. It is selling. Some of my other books that I had written previous to that aren't still selling. So I understand it is an important thing to share that story, and clearly there are people who need to hear it.
Yes, and that's why I really wanted, and then I'll also share, The Invisible Boy, another book that this is based on the play that you did in Madison, correct?
Yeah, this is actually the script of that
The
play,
script of that play. Okay.
and it is available if anybody ever wanted to produce it again. It has been produced one other time since it was first
And
premiered.
Callen, can you tell us about these are the shots from the production itself?
Mhm.
Tell us a little bit about what are we looking at here?
Okay. Well, the play was autobiographical in nature, so it was really my story. The picture on the left is the character as the young boy who is being abused. The picture on the right is the character as an adult. And that photo in the middle is that adult talking to his inner child. And the play was ultimately about my coming to terms with what happened and offering forgiveness to my oldest brother. He still has not apologized. I don't know that he ever will. I don't expect it. But for me, the forgiveness was really important. And I know it doesn't work for everyone. But for me, holding on to hatred and holding on to anger, that doesn't hurt him. It only hurts me. And so getting rid of that, letting that go, even if he never apologizes, that was important for me in my growth and my recovery to be able to move a little further down the road. And that's what was happening here as he was confronting that inner child, and later in the play confronts the perpetrator, and as the perpetrator is trying to molest the child again, even though it's an imaginary child at this point, and confronts him and says, I forgive you because I don't need you. This is your issue, not mine. And that's what I needed, and that's where I needed to go, both with the play and with my life.
That's so powerful. That idea of, not just forgiveness, and that's something that we've heard from other guests as well, but that idea of the conversation between your older self and your younger self. What you would share with them in hindsight. In listening to your story, I know Candace has, we both have some things we can relate to, some things that are obviously different. Each story is so unique, but there are things that bring us together. As my experience, it was a neighbor that abused me, and kind of like what you were describing. He came over one day, said he wanted to do a Cub Scout project, and knocked on the door, and sure, but how can I help? We had just moved into this neighborhood, and he came in and went to a downstairs room. It was my dad's office, and he proceeded to abuse me. But I had no idea what was going on. I had no words for what was happening, and the only reason it came to light, was because I had left the light on in that room. My dad came home and said, "Hey, what were you doing in the office?" It wasn't forbidden. It just I didn't have a reason to be in there, and I told him, "Oh, so and so came over and we did this and this, and I could have been describing playing with Matchbox toys, or you talked about kind of how play had been normal, but I didn't know what I was saying. I didn't know the words I was
Right.
describing."
It's interesting about the light, because in Invisible Boy, in the play, and in my life, I was at a point where I was sitting in my room in a co-op that I lived in with a very large kitchen knife to my wrist, but I had seen a little light coming from under the door of one of my housemates, and it was a woman who I really thought was a good person I cared about. And I made the decision to put the knife down and to go knock on her door. And I would say she saved my life. She opened the door, and I just looked at her and I said, I can't be alone. She invited me in. She didn't ask me any questions. She didn't intrude. I started crying. She let me be. She, offered a hug if I needed it, which I didn't want at that point. And she just sat with me. And then after a long, long time, must have been an hour or so, we went for a walk, and then I went to bed. And that was in the 1980s. And it was the last time that I thought about killing myself.
Yeah, that topic of suicide is so common with survivors. I know, Callen, in my book, I thought I was pregnant by my abuser, carrying this man's child, my mom's husband. And I was like, no, this is not going to be my life. And wanting to kill myself, wrote a suicide note. I went to a Catholic school, was born and raised Catholic, and they found it at school. The nuns, the sister that was the guidance counselor. So, the cloth, right? They call home. And who do they call? They call the abuser who's at home abusing me. And he
Oh
comes,
my
quote
God.
unquote, I felt to the rescue. Oh, my poor Candy. I remember being called up to the guidance office, sitting outside, hearing him inside, talking to them about the situation. And he knew why I wanted to, because that morning I had disclosed to him that I thought I was pregnant. He gave me a smirk and a smile, and I felt sick to my stomach. Like, this man is like happy about it, and basically told me to blame my boyfriend that I had broken up with a few months back. And I was like, no, like, I'd rather die. In my head, I was saying I'd rather kill myself than have this child. And knowing that my mom was trying to get pregnant, thank God. I don't have
Mm-hmm.
siblings, thank God. But, and when you talked about, the fear of your brother, the killing you, that's what they do. They intimidate us, they threaten us. I remember Fred finding a police officer's card. They had like officer friendlies. I'd go hang out at the mall just so I wasn't at home, right? To anything to be out of the house, so I wouldn't be abused. Found a
Yeah.
way just to get out. And I remember him finding Fred, my abuser, finding a card from a police officer, officer friendly, and cornering me and intimidating me and threatening me. And what did he want? What did I tell him anything? So I scared him. But then that's when I kind of felt a little power, like, ooh, then this is wrong. Then he knows that we're not supposed to be doing this, right?
Right.
But yeah, so I totally felt when you talked about the fear, um, that's so hard. Forgiveness, huge. There's so much power in it for you than
Yes.
anything else. And I believe in that. And you're right. Not every survivor can forgive. And that's okay. We're not here to say you have to. We're here to just say that it gives you more power when you do, because it's kind of forgiving. I think because we have to sometimes, I feel, forgive ourselves because we blame ourselves for so
Yes.
long, and we
That
have to
is
let go of that.
For
that is critical. I
for
agree.
both of you though, there's, and again, I'm using this to learn and grow myself and kind of figure this out. In both of your stories, there's more than just the abuser that would be a candidate for forgiveness. Uh, Your mom's in both cases, right? And
Yeah.
and other people in the story. I mean, much less yourselves. Um, can you talk a little bit about what it's like to? I mean, a lot of the focus is on forgiving the abuser, but I mean, where are you with forgiving? I mean, Candace, you talked about forgiving your mom. Um, Forgiving your moms, forgiving yourselves. I mean, is that the last step in the process? Is that the first step in the process?
I'd say it's a step in the process. I think the process is different for each person who goes down this road. Um, and I've never held that against my mother. I knew that it affected me in that way, but I also understood that generational thing, and that she had no clue that what she said was hurtful. She was just trying to parent as well as she could with no um, but no guidebook really. So I had forgiven my mother a long time ago.
Mm.
For me, the forgiving myself was probably the hard part because you do tend to blame yourself. You think it's your fault. You think that you're the one who caused it. Um, you wonder if who you are is what made them do it. And I don't, this hasn't come up yet, but I'm gay. And, one of the things that I had mentioned to you, Neil, prior to this is one of the things that I learned in my coming out about this abuse was that I am not gay because I was abused, and I was not abused because I'm gay. But a lot of people, especially male survivors who are straight, question, what does this mean? Does this make me gay? What's going on? So there's always this self blame that comes along with that. I think that's if not 100%, pretty universal feeling with survivors. Would you say that, Candace? Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would agree. I remember one time someone questioning my sexuality, it was, and I was like, well, what does that mean? I didn't know the words for what that really meant. And they were like, oh, well, I thought that, if you're abused that, you might be gay. And I was like, where did that come from? I guess I didn't, I never heard that. I never correlated. I just remember someone coming at me that way and I wasn't sure how to respond. And
Mm.
I had never, I think for me, I was very promiscuous. If
I
I
was too.
because for me it was if this was happening to me, by this person, right? Not out of the want or desire or choice, it was I was going to pick who I wanted to be with, right? It was on my terms and it was my decision and being promiscuous something I regret because I wasn't taking care of myself. I was myself at risk by, having unprotected, unsafe sex is horrible to say it, but running the risk. And I hate to say it to this day, I have health issues because of being promiscuous, um, and that's unfortunate. I've had a lot of problems, so, but, and that's also hereditary, but still talking with doctors and understanding and explaining, and they say, if you're being abused at a young age and, you're being touched and penetrated and things can happen to your body. And so not to point fingers, blame, but it affected my health, my well-being, so.
Yeah, mine too. I was also very promiscuous for a period in my young adulthood. Slept around with a lot of people. I couldn't give you a number. Um, it's not something I'm ashamed of or proud of. It just is. Um, but I did that a lot, and it is one of the things that a lot of survivors do. And I think for that reason that you just said, it gives you the power. You're the one in control. You're making those decisions. It's not somebody thrusting themselves upon you. I also damaged my health with drug and alcohol abuse for years. I would go out to the bars, drink 18, 20 brandy cokes in an evening, regular basis. Every one of the gay bars in Madison had specials on different nights. So I was always there on those nights because I was also poor because I wasn't taking care of myself in any way. But I would, go to the beer bashes and things like that. Pretty much drunk every night for 10 years straight. And, people would say, I think you have a problem. I'd be like, it's none of your damn business. This is my life. Until I realized one night when I was living in Denver that I was killing myself in a different way with that, and that I had to stop. I went home and told my partner at that time, I said, I'm quitting drinking. And his response, and I don't blame him for this, was, yeah, I'll believe that when I see it. That was April 18th of 1989. Haven't had a drink since.
Congratulations on your sobriety.
Congratulations.
Wow.
That's great.
That is amazing. Yeah. I want to go back, Neil, if we can, just forgiveness, when we talked about forgiveness and, forgiving of yourself. But then my mom, I never really blame my mom because I knew Fred was abusive. I mean, I don't want to say that it was domestic violence situation, but he was intimidating, threatening, so I know she probably felt a certain way too. I remember, there was one situation where he had physically hit my mom and, I remember cops being called. I remember the ambulance coming. I remember my mom's sisters coming into the house, and my aunt, cussing him out. You ever lay another hand on my sister, I'll kill you. Like, where family, came in and to rescue my mom, and she stayed with them. And again, people don't leave, and so I always remember that. And I was little. I remember him because I was screaming because my mom was being hurt, and I remember him taking, in the Hispanic, taking a chancla, which is a flip flop, and hitting me, and telling me to shut up, quit crying, like. And I don't know if they were drunk. I don't know if they were coming from a wedding. I don't know why it got to that point, but after that, I never saw him ever lift another finger on my mom. But I think that was enough to just, I think in my head too, scare me. And be fearful, but I never blame my mom ever. It was all his doing. And unfortunately I was abused by two family members, his brother when I was 5, and then Fred when I was 11 to 15. So, again, I think I was being conditioned at a very young age and not being talked to about my body, my private parts. But, my dedication in my book, I talk about, I don't blame my mom. And I never wanted anyone to go attack my mom or, try to be my saving grace and go at her inappropriate because it's not their place. And then when the book came out, I gave my mom a big hug and I just let her know, like, Mom, this is not a reflection on you. This is my story. And I don't blame you. I don't want you to ever take anything with you. This isn't about you and what you did. You were a great mom. You were a support system. And, she lives with me. She's retired and now I take care of her. So, so it's a great relationship and I'm blessed to have her.
Thank you for sharing that, Candace. That's I think it's really important for people to hear. It's something I think that sometimes gets lost in these conversations. It's the collateral damage in terms of relationships, not just the impact on you and your abuser, but then everyone else around you and how it ripples out.
Well, just I know the ripple of my daughters and their adult children with their children, and we're now having a lot more honest conversations about what they felt, And
Hmm.
I had this man who abused me, Fred, in their lives for a period of time because both of my daughters were around him, and he was acting like grandpa, and they were like, "That's not my grandpa," and I knew it wasn't. But again, I wasn't ready to speak up back when like I am now. So it's just crazy. It took me many, many years of therapy to be confident in what I was talking, my story, and to not be afraid because fear held me back. And it wasn't until 2017 when the hashtag Me Too movement happened and all of Hollywood was coming out with their stories. And I'm thinking, well, I'm not Hollywood. I'm just this little girl, Latina girl in Wisconsin. It was happening to me. I have a story and I'm going to share. And thank God I did, because like you said, Callen, the ripple effect with the book, and if it just touches one life, then you've done your job.
Yeah, and it'll touch many more, I'm sure.
Many more. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And look at where we are on this podcast. This is amazing.
Exactly. It's interesting when you were talking about your mom. I think Catholic mothers back when I was growing up were not very good about talking to their children about their bodies and that kind of thing. My mom once asked me when I was in my early 20s, she goes, I did a good job with sex education, don't you think? And I'm sitting there thinking, I don't ever remember any conversation about sex. So if you were talking about it, I had no clue what you were talking about because you didn't make it clear. So she was, very awkward about those kinds of things. So, and again, I think that's part of why she didn't know how to respond when I first told her when I was about 9 that had happened to me. But I don't blame her for that. She was actually a more difficult thing for her was me coming out as gay, actually, because Catholic teaching teaches that's, love the sinner, but not the sin.
Mm-hmm.
You've probably heard that before if you grew up Catholic.
Yes.
So I did, when I wrote the play, I did decide I needed to talk to my mother because I was being produced here in Madison, which has a daily newspaper, a couple daily newspapers, and a weekly arts magazine. And those people always reviewed the plays, and she it's 80 miles away, but the people in that town either got the Madison paper or the Dubuque paper, and she was a Madison newspaper subscriber. So I knew that she would see reviews, and she was in the hospital at the time. She had broken her hip. And so I sat down and told her, I said, I wrote this play about growing up, about being sexually abused, and I need to let you know about it because you'll probably see it in the paper. And she looked at me and she goes, "Who did that to you?" So I don't even think she remembered that first time when I talked to her. And I told her, and she was like, she just sort of clammed up. And there was something about the way that she looked and acted in that moment that I knew that she had also been abused as a child. I just knew it. And I asked her, and she just said, "Well, why are you asking that? I don't know. I don't think so." But I'm confident that she was. I could just tell by the look in her eye.
It's something that I've spent a lot of time thinking about. I mean, everything that you're talking about as a father. My daughter is 9, is 10 actually, and early on we wanted to make sure that she was aware of her body. One of the first books we read to her helped her understand her body parts and use the right language. And I've taken it a step further. I'm actually teaching the Our Whole Lives is what they call it at the Unitarian Church, the sex ed course there, in order to give people the language and space to talk about these issues. But what you're talking about in terms of the conversations with your moms, it's something that in the run up to this season, and over the last several months, I mean, I knew I had to sit down and talk to my mom, early on, because this has been all over, my social media and my website and talking to people about it. Um, it's a journey. You know, I'm still figuring this out. I wrote a blog post about being abused, about sexual abuse during the Brett Kavanaugh hearings a couple of years ago. I did when I worked at United Way. I also hosted a Sunday show, the New York Times read along, and that one particular Sunday when I was home in Hastings, we talked about the coverage of the Brett Kavanaugh hearings, but then I quickly pivoted to sharing my story from the home I grew up in. And I knew that it was a public place, a public space rather, but there were people that I was familiar with. The audience are kind of, there's a regular crowd that joins. So that was the first time that I actually talked about it out loud. But that my mom was not just watching; she was in the kitchen watching. I talked with her afterward. I gave her a heads up that it was going to be a challenging, a sensitive show. I think, but um, all of that, and then the guilt about what happens and kind of choices you make afterward. Um,
Okay.
that's a lot to carry. It's a lot to the feeling of responsibility. It took me years to realize that I wasn't responsible. I wasn't responsible for being abused when I was 6. I was 7. I knew that, but it was the year after, the summer after, and the summer after that. Um, I always thought that I had asked for it, that I had initiated it, but I engaged in some sexual activity with the person who abused me in the woods outside our house, I think in his basement. I I always thought that it was of my own volition, that it was something that I was asking for. It took years to realize that I didn't have agency, that it wasn't me. Um, on a good day, I fully can embrace that it wasn't me, and there are moments that I still have trouble talking about that and coming to grips with it. I mean, it's just it's hard to carry it.
I
And
think,
that's go
oh,
ahead,
sorry.
Callen.
I
No,
was
go
just
ahead.
going to interject. I think one of the really difficult things for male survivors in particular is that your body reacts and things can actually feel physically good even when they're emotionally not good. Um, and so that helps lead to that kind of shame and blame. Like, oh, I must be responsible because my body reacted and because those physical sensations felt good, even though I feel awful. And it's a very hard thing, that dichotomy to sort of balance and understand that male bodies will react even in negative circumstances like that.
Yeah, I felt the same way, the whole, like Neil, what you said, like you're asking for it, kind of anticipating when it's going to happen. Fred, he did do a lot of drinking, did drugs. And I had an aha moment when he was very high and like almost like uncontrollably high. Like I could just tell something wasn't right with him. Then he left me alone. So I was like, oh, I hope he's drinking, or oh, I hope he's smoking, or I hope he's done something today. And then it's when he wasn't. And then I thought, I must have been his other drug. Like that's was like an aha moment that I had, that I must have been something else that he quote unquote needed, right?
Wow.
Um, and it just, it kind of upsets me. And I kind of gone through some of those roller coaster of emotions doing, this season, and really having these video conversations, right? And in a different type of way, but it's just like raw and real about how I felt. And I felt like the other woman. I felt like I was in a relationship with this man and I wasn't. But it was just me being this young child that did not know what was going on, didn't comprehend again, and I remember going to sex education classes, or they were having them at school, and Fred and my mom pulled me out. And I thought, I bet you that was his doing and not hers. He pulled me out probably because I would maybe discover that something was wrong, or I would
Yeah.
maybe say something. And I took a first aid class, so I knew how to put a band-aid on and stitch you up. So, but yeah, they pulled me out of sex education, and I'll never forget that. All these correlations of things that I was experiencing, and it was all to protect him. He was
Yeah.
protecting himself. Mhm.
I
Mm.
I want to clarify, and when I say that I felt like I was asking for it, like, and it wasn't like a, I did something and I put myself in a situation. I mean, like, I felt like I initiated it. Like I literally said, "Hey, let's go and do this. Let's, um, like, again, almost in the same way as, hey, let's go shoot some hoops.
Hmm.
Let's
Yeah.
go, behind the tree in the woods." And and so that's kind of where, that's what's in my mind. That's what I carry. um
Mm.
and so when you talk about the idea of forgiving yourself, you know um I mean, the frustration I had with the initial experience is that I don't feel like my parents did anything after the abuse. I mean, the scene I remember is going, I told my dad, we went across the street or down the street. We're standing in front of our neighbor's house. He confronts the father. The father turns around and yells, for his son to get down here. That's all I remember. I don't remember anything else um, from that scene. I don't remember um, my abuser being at the door, whatever he might have said or not said. I don't remember walking back to the house. It's just like it's like I'm transported from telling the story of what happened in the house and the next thing I know, we're in front of their house, and then I'm just on with my life.
Mm.
And it's not. I mean, every story is different. I've always wondered. I mean, and I don't wonder. I know why they didn't say anything. My parents are immigrants. They didn't want to engage with law enforcement or authorities, or call attention to it. Um, it's I mean, it's not hard to figure that part out. Um, Really, I guess what I'm left with is figuring out how not to um, how to not hold on to that, and how to kind of I guess what I'm doing is exercising it, right? By talking about it, and I've described this, Candace, season 3, as a seminar for me. Even if we don't have an audience, even if no one's watching, I'm learning from all these guests, and I'm figuring out how to heal.
Yeah,
Callen,
and I
thank you
think
so
all
much.
these and all right, and all these conversations are helping you to find the right way to talk to your mom, to find the right words, because we all have experience in how we share it and how we've said it, things that we've gone through. So I think you're right, Neil. This is just helping you to heal even more. And again, you feel this personal responsibility, not only for yourself and your story, but now for others. You have this personal responsibility. And Callen, I just want to say kudos to your friend that you live with. When you talked about having that knife and wanting, to commit suicide and thinking about doing the act, and then her just being there and you saying to her, "I can't be alone." I mean, I wish more people that are having those thoughts could just say out loud and speak the most unspoken right words, that I am having these thoughts of just not wanting to be here anymore, or I want to kill myself. I mean, that should be more of the norm now, and it should be okay. Like, what can I do to help? Or again, like she just sat there and she listened, or she let you cry. I just feel we need to advocate for that as well. Mental health, getting therapy, seeking help. There's so many resources. I didn't know about any of those resources when I was in my trauma. But
Same.
now I'm here, an advocate, banding together with other survivors like Callen, and you're such a great resource. And then Neil, learning together, right? Being on this journey together. It's very powerful when we stand together. We're stronger together.
One of the
Absolutely.
things I'm very impressed with, Callen, with the work that you're doing. Uh, you're a public speaker on these issues. You've spoken to a number of groups. You've organized conferences. Can you tell us a little bit about that work?
Sure. Um, the conference got started because there's an organization called Male Survivor, which I think you're familiar with, and I was on their email list, and they had sent out a thing about a movie that they had available called Boys and Men Healing, and I thought, oh, that needs to come to Madison. So I contacted them and said, I'd like to bring this to Madison, and I can't remember her name, but the main office person there, I think it was Trish, wrote back and said, maybe you should work with some local organization to help you do this, because we usually send it to organizations, not just to individuals. So I immediately contacted the Rape Crisis Center, explained what I wanted to do. And the executive director said, well, if you're going to spend the money to bring that film here, why not just make it an all-day thing and do a conference? So I said, okay. So I started going around town. And I think that first year we had 9 co-sponsoring organizations, truly a grassroots effort. And the keynote that year ended up being Chris Anderson, who was the executive director of Male Survivor. And I somehow managed for a number of years to get all of our speakers to do it for no charge. And we had some really great speakers. I would just explain, that it's a grassroots thing. It's really important. We'll pay for your airfare and hotel, but we don't have a lot of money. And they were all very generous in that. So it ended up being a full day conference where we would have local therapists, survivors, others come in and speak and do workshops and presentations. And by the time, we advanced a little bit, we had like um, groups for survivors, groups for therapists, and groups for allies and family. So there would be, tracks that you could go, and you could pick and choose from those tracks which presentations work best for you, and there would always be a keynote. As far as my own speaking, I just go wherever I'm invited. Most recently, I spoke to Active Minds at UW Milwaukee. I don't have any current ones coming up. I was supposed to speak at, it was going to be by Zoom because of COVID, but I was supposed to speak to the assault organization in Racine. And 2 days before I was supposed to speak, back in 21, I ended up in the hospital with stage 3 colon cancer. So I had to cancel that one. And then I hadn't done any speaking until this Milwaukee one just a couple months ago. So I really enjoyed doing that. I had one of the most difficult ones I ever did was in Platteville. I lived there for several years. It's where I came out, and it was a really hard experience coming out in that town in 1979, which is only 10 years after Stonewall. So speaking there at the Memorial Union, which was a corner where I had people throwing beer bottles out of their car windows at me because I was gay. But the previous night I had stayed with my sister who lives in the house that I grew up in. And, so I was in that basement where things happened. Every room in that house was where things happened. So that really brought all these emotions up before doing that talk in Platteville. It was during Sexual Assault Awareness Month. So that was probably one of the more difficult ones I've done, just because of the emotional context of the place and where I had slept the night before. But I spoke at Male Survivors International Conference a number of years ago in New Jersey. I was a keynote speaker in Eau Claire. Most of my speaking has been around Wisconsin, because that's where people have heard about me, or somebody else says, hey, you should ask this guy to talk or whatever. So I'm always happy to do that and share my story. Always open it up for question and answers afterwards. And there is not a question that I am uncomfortable answering.
We're an open book. Definitely. So speaking of books, so Callen, I don't know if you had a chance to read my book Unspoken yet.
I have not
but
yet. Sorry.
that's okay. I'm just going to put a plug for it here. We're getting ready to kind of full circle, right? Kind of close out our show. But thank you for everyone who has supported me. But my book is available, Unspoken by Candace Sanchez. You can find it on my personal website, www.candacesanchez.com, or you can go to your Amazon friends, whichever you prefer. But if you go through my swag store, you can get a personalized signed copy autographed to your home residence. And then just trust that anything you do purchase from my swag Unspoken store, I do promote and give to lots of organizations. I donate to sexual assault survivor programs within the Milwaukee and within the Racine area. And Neil is holding up one of his coffee mugs with the Unspoken podcast logo. So that is a great plug. Thank you for plugging that. And
That's
and
awesome.
Callen, as a guest, every guest gets a mug. So you get your choice in either a chocolate colored mug or a white tall mug. So one is a little bit smaller, but we'll talk about that. But, as we begin to wrap up, I wanted to also share that I actually am part of a national foundation now to ending child abuse and neglect. So I brought a walk to the city of Milwaukee here. We had the walk at the beautiful Lake Michigan in Oak Creek, Wisconsin. We did the walk here in the fall of 2022. We raised almost $10,000 for the cause. The National Foundation to End Child Abuse is tied to, of course, our abuse stories, right? And so just kind of wanting to put a plug for NCAN. I now am on their board of directors. So now I'm working with the National Foundation as a survivor and as a voice on their national board. So I'm very excited about that. So I wanted to make sure we plugged NCAN. Make sure if they're in your city, support, or just go visit their website, endcan.org. if you would like to be inclined to make a donation or consider walking in our walk, we're having one in 2023 as well. So I'm excited about that. And so how I would like to close out, Callen, if you're so inclined to help us close out the show, my last chapter of my book was called Full Circle Blessings. And I always like to ask everybody on my show, what are you most grateful for? Full circle blessings.
I am most grateful that I have always been a survivor, and I'm grateful for the people in my life who have allowed me to survive or helped me to survive. And that's a lot of them. My partner, Brian, the friend that I talked about earlier. I have a friend who's a therapist, although that's not our relationship, but she has been a godsend to me as well. So mostly for the love that I have in my life.
Love is love. I love it. Thank you, Callen. Neil, what are you most grateful for?
Well, Candace, I'll say, I've said this a few times, but I'm continuously grateful um, for you and our friend Dawn, who have really helped me to find my voice with this. This is, as I've said, I feel like I'm much, kind of at the very beginning of this journey, um, but it's giving me the confidence to talk about it. It's giving me the confidence to engage with people, and to exercise some of these demons. Um, I mean, if I can lift some of this off my chest, um, in terms of my feelings about it, it can only get better from here. So thank you, Candace.
Absolutely. And I'm just grateful for, having the ability to have a platform to do this. It's hard work. This is tough work, but when somebody's got to do it, and I'm so grateful that we're all doing it. And so I say, you know, we are thriving. We're thrivers. We get up every day, no matter how difficult and hard it can be to get up on some days. We are here. And I'm grateful for my family, for the love and support that I also have, and just to everybody that has supported Unspoken Conversations with Candace. The partnership with Digimentors, again, partnership with Jeff Chugum and Associates, again, if it wasn't for those individuals, these organizations, these business owners, these other survivors coming together to say this is important work. Let's join forces. Let's do this together. So, Callen, thank you so much for being on the show today. So great to have you. And I will be bringing back that conference. We're going to talk about that conference and bringing something back
Awesome.
in Wisconsin here. So thank you for allowing me to carry that torch. If you will hand that torch over, I'll take it and make you proud.
Okay. That's awesome. I'm glad to hear that.
Awesome. Thank you, Callen, for joining today.
Thank you so
Well,
much. This is a good experience. I appreciate what you're doing.
I want to offer my thanks as well, Callan. It really means a lot, and appreciate you taking the time and all the work that you've been doing. I mean, I every guest that we've had, there's something that I take away, and your writing and your advocacy, your work in organizing, the conference. Um, Thank you.
Changes in
Thank you.
law, changes the law. I mean, even
Yeah.
that, just changes
Yeah.
in law. So, Callen, your work, I mean, just when I look at your bio and I looked at your website and I just saw all the things that you have done, I need to catch up. But it's not a contest. I'm just like so in inspired. I'm inspired to continue to do the work every year that every day that we record or every episode that we produce. It's for the helpful to others. So the impact is going to be huge. So thank you
You
again.
guys are inspiring me too, so I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow. What a great conversation, huh?
A great conversation, Neil. This was wonderful. Callen was an amazing guest. Very, I think there's going to be so many people that will tune in and watch and listen in, and the audience is just, Callen has a great following. I mean, just from seeing all the work that he's doing, and I think it's the impact's going to be even more beneficial with him being on Unspoken Conversation with Candace, and then him being able to share this and having this testimony be a conversation that people need to hear, right? The intimate conversation. And we all, between the three of us together, understanding and feeling each other's feelings. I think that that's so valid. So,
What I really appreciate when I think about the different guests we've had, the everyone has a different story, everyone has a different experience, but some of these themes are so universal. Forgiveness and the guilt that people have in the relationships and the conversations that they have to have with people.
mhm.
Um, I this is, I don't know if it's even possible, but when we talk about a conference, when we talk about male survivors, can you imagine in 2024 if we could actually bring together all of the guests in one place in person? Can you imagine
So,
if we could pull that
well,
off?
well, Neil, so, speaking of that, I would like to bring, like, I don't know if it's an Unspoken Conversation with Candace podcast, but yes, inviting everybody, inviting who Callan had, inviting
Yeah,
all of my season 1, season 2, season 3, all the guests, having them all bring people, like, whether it's an open conference and whether it's just people that are in the advocacy world, people that are trying to make change, inviting people from NCAN, other survivor groups. Like, I think this conference can be huge.
yeah.
And to host it, how many would come, and so I cannot wait to get that information from Callan and then figure out how we make that happen.
Yeah.
But I'm definitely willing to take that on. Maybe not 2024. I'll say 2025.
25. Let's go.
Give me a
We'll
couple years to
spend
plan.
we'll
We
spend
gotta
2024 planning it, and
planning
then
it and then
25
doing.
we'll have
Yes.
the
Yes.
event. But
Agreed.
it really is it's there's just so much to take from these conversations. And I'm hoping, and one of the things I didn't mention earlier, but I was saying it in jest, that this is a personal kind of seminar for me in dealing with these issues. But the ultimate goal really is for male survivors to hear these stories. I mean, that's why I jumped at the chance when you said that you wanted to dedicate season 3 to male survivors. And I said, great. I said, okay, let's do one better. Let's make this, take from the podcast and make it a video, live stream,
Hmm.
uh, to get more eyeballs on it, to get more people hearing these stories and kind of being inspired. And if we can expand that audience, if we can get more people to hear these inspirational stories, and if that helps them to come to grips with what they've experienced, that's, at the end of the day, that's what I'm hoping uh,
Yep.
will accomplish.
It's the
Um,
impact. Definitely want to make an impact and leave a legacy. This information, these things that we're doing today are going to be out there forever. And so, while I wish that no abuse occurred, no
yeah,
child was ever offended, nobody would get hurt, we want to change that statistic of 1 in 4, 1 in 6, the girls, 1 in 6 boys by the time they're 18. It has been this constant for 50 years, supposedly has been that same thing. Why hasn't that changed?
yeah,
We do a lot around cancer. We do a lot around breast cancer, diabetes management, heart disease. Why is this taboo topic so, like, tainted? You can't touch it. And that's where we coming together are going to move that needle. And I believe that. And that's the journey that we're on. Thanks to Callan for coming on. Thank you, Neil, for being my co-host. Thank you to everybody that's tuning in to Unspoken Conversation with Candace. Please stay tuned for another episode. More to come. Thank you so much for joining today.
thank you.